The Acolyte episode 7 is here, and we finally have the answer to the question, what happened 16 years ago on Brendock? And it doesn't look too good for the Jedi.
I got a bad feeling about this.
From getting to see a Wookiee Jedi in live action, to possibly Mother Koril still being alive, to a possible connection to how these twins were created, to even a reference to the High Republic novels. There's a lot to get into with this 7th episode, so let's break it all down. Episode 7 is titled Choice, which is in reference to the choice that Sol has to make at the end of the episode, to save Osha or to save May. But there are many choices that happen in this episode that affect the future of this show. From Torben and Sol not listening to the High Council, to all 4 of these Jedi lying to Osha for the next 16 years, to even the decision of Mother Koril to attack the Jedi without giving either party any time to explain themselves. So Choice is the title. And we open on Brendock 16 years ago, as we see our 4 Jedi, Kelnaka, Torben, Indara, and Sol, as they are looking at the life on this planet, as they don't understand how there could be life on this planet, as this planet was supposed to have no life on it because of a hyperspace disaster 100 years ago, in reference to an event called the Great Hyperspace Disaster. Now, without explaining the entire story of the High Republic novels, they take place 100 years before this Acolyte show, in a time of peace in the galaxy. And the villains of the series are a group called the Nihil, who have a way with hyperspace. And the Great Hyperspace Disaster is when some ships come flying out of hyperspace and crash into inhabited and uninhabited planets. So this explains that Brendock was one of those planets, and it was categorized as lifeless. However, that explains the opening of this 7th episode. These Jedi are very confused as to why they're finding all of this life around this planet. And of course, I couldn't help but notice, but this box that Master Sol is carrying looks an awful lot like it's about to capture a ghost in Ghostbusters. But we get a scene of all 4 Jedi sitting around a fire later that night, and Torben is not eating because he's sick of being on this mission. He wants to go back home to Coruscant. And he explains that they've been here for 7 weeks on this mission to Brendock. And he says there's clearly nobody here. If there were, we would have found them by now. And that's when Indara explains to him 100 years ago, the Jedi classified this planet as dead because of the Great Hyperspace Disaster. And yet, here we are today, and Brendock is thriving, with life all over it. And Torben says, yeah, that's cool, there's plants, whatever. He wants to be doing something meaningful. And that's when Sol explains that they are looking for what's called a vergence. Sense these force vergences, or force energy centered around a specific location. And then Sol goes on to say that a vergence could create life, like what's happening on this planet. And this is explaining that the Force isn't just something that is wielded. It's not to use Force push, Force pull, Force choke, Force lightning. The Force is in all things. Some things more than others. That's also why in Star Wars, some planets are more connected to the Force than others. Think of Dagobah or Ahch-To or Ilum. All of these planets have very strong connections to the Force, and those planets are usually where you'd find a Jedi temple. But Sol tells Torben that this is a power that should be studied, and nothing should be more important to the Jedi. The mission they are on is a noble one. The next day, we get a conversation between Sol and Indara, to which Indara says her Padawan is too distracted to appreciate the significance of a vergence. And she also says, nor are we sure that this is the real reason that all this life is here on Brendock. To which Sol says he was disturbed, unbalanced. And Indara says, no, you are disturbed. Don't confuse Torben's feelings for your own. They get interrupted by Kelnaka, who shrieks, "Arr!" Now, we don't really know what he said, but Sol splits off from the group and goes to explore the Northlands. As he jets off on his speeder, it's very reminiscent of the speeder chase in Return of the Jedi. A lot of foreshadowing to the Skywalker saga in this 7th episode. But Sol comes to a place where he sees these butterflies. And yes, those are the same butterflies from episode 3, as he stumbles upon Osha and May. Now, this 7th episode is the exact same events playing out from episode 3 from the Jedi's perspective. And in episode 3, it was from Osha's perspective. So now we get to see what truly happened. And Sol begins to follow the girls. He follows them all the way back to the witch's fortress. And as he tries to get in the door, it's of course locked, which leads him to scale the side of the entire fortress. He then spies on the girls as they train with their mother, like we saw in episode 3, and it confirms that Sol is the one who made the noise that made Mother Koril curious and look at the generator. We then get a very interesting scene where Sol is looking at a bunch of witches as they are staring over this very dark deep hole. And maybe they're just preparing for the ascension ceremony. There's definitely something really off about this giant hole. And it's clear that there's something important about it because they focused on that specific scene. But Sol goes back to the other Jedi and informs them of what he found. And Indara calls it a force cult, to which Sol responds, I think they're witches. And Torben butts in and says, Night Sisters? Now this is a reference to the Night Sisters of Dathomir. We've seen this version of witches many times throughout Star Wars, originally introduced in the Clone Wars, but we've also gone on to see them in Star Wars Rebels and, most recently, in the Ahsoka series. But Indara says there's a difference here. It can't be Night Sisters because they don't raise kids, and they definitely don't train them. And Sol says, I don't think they're training these girls. And Indara advises them to go tell the Jedi Council of this discovery, to which Sol responds with, I fear for these girls' safety. I don't think we have time to tell the Jedi Council. The witches are preparing for a ceremony tonight. And as he says that, Indara looks up to the sky. She senses what's coming as she sees the two moons coming close to an eclipse, which could never mean good news. Sol says, I know you'd probably defer to the Jedi Council, but I insist you have to come see what I see. And as they make their way to the witch's fortress, the door is locked. As Kelnaka splices the door, Indara says she wants to go in there alone, so to not scare the witches and think that they are there as a threat. But Sol says that there are over 50 witches in there, and she's gonna need backup. She agrees, and they go up the elevator. And now we get to see the scene of the Jedi interrupting the ceremony from the Jedi's perspective. Most importantly, from Torben's perspective, as his mind is taken over by Mother Anisea. And this scene is absolutely wild. While in the real world, Mother Anisea is talking to the Jedi, having a full-on conversation, she's also inside Torben's head, telling him information about himself that nobody would ever know except for him. And as Torben looks around, he's inside the same location, the witch's fortress, but nobody else is around. Anisea in this scene is completely messing with Torben's mind. She can tell that he wants to leave the planet and go back to Coruscant like we learned earlier, and she's really diving deep into that, echoing over and over and over again in his head, do you want to leave this planet? Your master is denying you what you want. I would never do that. Anisea is really playing on the dark side here, with wants, needs, and desires, which is not the Jedi way. But as Torben gives in to his desires, his eyes roll black, and he falls to his knees. We then get the same scene from episode 3 where Mother Anisea agrees to allow the girls to go test to see if they are force sensitive, and Torben wakes up afraid as the Jedi leave. We then cut back to the ship where we get a conversation between Indara and Sol. Indara says it was very clever for him to suggest that they would test the girls, as it buys them time to check in with the Jedi Council. And that's when Sol tells Indara that he feels a connection to Osha. And Indara says, no, this is not something we're taking seriously. This is just to buy us more time to talk to the Jedi Council and see what our next move is. And Osha's too old to join the Order anyway. But Sol says no. I feel she is meant to be my Padawan. Sol immediately feels this crazy connection to Osha, as he is tapped very much into his emotions, which again is not the Jedi way. Indara says that the witches will never let Osha leave, but Sol explains that she didn't have the markings on her head that May did. Maybe she didn't want to be a part of the witches' coven anymore. And Sol insists that Osha is in trouble, and who else is going to protect her but the Jedi? And Sol says that he believes Osha wants to leave with us. To which Indara responds with, don't confuse what Osha wants with what you want. That might be a big problem. Yes, we know from episode 3 that Osha wants to leave the witches, wants to become a Jedi, but that's just because she felt different. If Sol didn't feel this connection with Osha, then probably nothing would have happened. But that's not the case. As we cut forward to when May and Osha come to take their test. In episode 3, we got to see Osha take her test, but not May. And now we get to see May's test. May lies like her mother told her to when she is tested to see if she has force abilities. But her blood has already been taken, and the blood doesn't lie. Also, when Indara starts to ask May questions, we get some pretty crazy information. Indara asks what they were all doing in the courtyard, to which May responds with ascension. And Indara asks, what is that? Is your markings on your head part of that ascension? She says ascension must be very important to you if it includes a marking like that. And May responds with, Mama says ascension means Osha and I will lead the coven. These two girls were created to lead this coven of witches. And as Indara asks, how are two children supposed to lead the witches? May stops answering questions. she doesn't know anymore. But I believe this ascension ceremony, if it was done correctly the way it was supposed to, would have turned Osha and May into one being. But I will get to that as we see this later on in the episode. May does say that Mama said everyone must be sacrificed to fulfill their destiny. Again, we'll get to it. Indara says thank you for explaining that to me, and May leaves. The next time those two meet, it ends pretty poorly. Indara dies. But Sol turns to Indara and says May was clearly instructed to fail. With your permission, I would like to take a different approach with the other child. Indara agrees, and well, we know what happens. Osha does tell the truth. We then cut to Indara telling Torben to run the blood tests of the children, and you, Sol, and Kelnaka will go back into the field, and I'll wait here and contact Coruscant. Indara is going to ask if they can take Osha in because she has passed the test. And as the three Jedi await her arrival in the forest, Sol senses that something has gone wrong. As Indara shows up, she tells him that the council has said no. The Jedi Council has not sanctioned them to bring the twins to Coruscant, or to separate them from their coven, to which Torben says there's clearly something off with these witches. You saw what they were capable of. And Indara responds with the council says we've already interfered too much. Torben asks, will they let us at least come home now? And Indara says no. Torben just wants to go home. As Torben finally gets the results for the blood test of the twins. He says their M counts, or midichlorian counts, are very high. Recently in Star Wars, we've seen this quite a bit. Being able to calculate the midichlorians in a being by taking their blood. We saw it a lot in the Bad Batch Season 3 with Project Necromancer on Mount Tantus. Now we're seeing it again 100 years earlier in the Acolyte. Torben says their M count is high, extremely high. He says that their symbionts are the same, meaning all of their data matches up exactly. And although they are twins and it would make sense that they have similar graphics, every being in the galaxy has a different amount of midichlorians or force sensitivity. And these twins are the exact same. Sol says that's impossible unless these twins were artificially created. To which Indara says maybe by tapping into a power dense enough to split one consciousness into two bodies. And Sol says only a Vergence could create such a power. Now, it was described earlier that a Vergence has the ability to create life, like bringing Brendock back to life after it was destroyed by the great hyperspace disaster. But these two girls coming from the same consciousness, just splitting it into two? Now that is interesting. But Torben takes this differently. He sees this as his ticket off this rock, back to Coruscant, as these girls are proof of a Vergence, and a Vergence is what they came to find. So if he can go capture these two girls, then he can get off Brendock and go back home. As he hops on a speeder and blasts off, Sol jumps on his own, and Indara tells him to stop Torben. She says Kelnaka and I will get back to the ship. We then get the scene from episode 3 where May and Osha are fighting because Osha didn't lie on the test, and Mother Koril takes May away. However, this time we get that perspective, not the one from Osha and Mother Anisea. And Koril tells May, you want to stop Osha from leaving? Then do it. She said the Jedi won't warn you before they attack you, as she sends her off to go get mad. We see Anisea bring together her council of witches. All of these witches are telling her to not allow Osha to leave. But Anisea says Osha has chosen and we can't stop her. But Mother Anisea has to choose between being a leader and a mother, and she chooses mother. Another callback to the title of this episode, because if she chooses their leader, things go a lot differently. We then see May destroying the elevator up as she yells to the other witches nobody is getting in or out. And Mother Koril is starting a revolution out here, telling the witches to arm themselves. As Torben and Sol arrive, the elevator has been shut down and they have to scale the side of the building. At the same time they are climbing is when May starts the fire. Mother Anisea comes out to see Koril's revolution and asks her what's going on, and she responds that the Jedi have breached the walls. Mother Anisea says, I told you that we would not be using violence, to which Koril responds with, and I told you I would die before I let the Jedi take my children, because Koril was the one who carried these girls. She has a strong connection to them too. Sol and Torben come across the witches, and Sol says they come with noble intentions. They want to know how the girls were created, and Mother Anisea says someday those noble intentions that you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy, foreshadowing exactly what happens. The same noble intentions that Sol has here to take Osha away from her family is the same intentions that Qui-Gon had when he was taking Anakin away from his family, believing he was the chosen one, but actually creating the monster known as Darth Vader. This conversation gets interrupted by May, who comes out screaming about a fire. May looks at Koril and screams, help me, as Mother Koril starts the fight. Torben takes out his lightsaber as Mother Anisea begins to turn to dust. She looks like some sort of vampire who's turning into a bat, but May is also turning to dust at the same time. I believe that Mother Anisea here was trying to combine the two of them into one all-powerful being, just like the Ascension ceremony was supposed to do with Osha and May. But her efforts are cut short by Sol, who takes out his lightsaber and kills Mother Anisea. Anisea tells Sol that she was gonna let Osha go with them. It's what she wanted, pretty much giving the blessing for Sol to take Osha. But Sol immediately realizes that he's done something wrong. He killed an unarmed person, which is again not the Jedi way. As May comes over and starts shaking Anisea's body, looking up at Sol, Koril tells her to run. As the fight begins, Koril starts attacking Sol, but he won't fight back, as Torben gets shot at by all these bow and arrows by the other witches. As Mother Koril screams, "Fight me," the generator explodes. And as they're distracted, Mother Koril turns into the same dust that Mother Anisea was going to earlier. But like I said before, it looks like Mother Anisea and May were going to become one. Is that what Koril's doing here? We don't see Mother Koril die by the end of this episode. Is she just going into May's body, or is she becoming May herself? It might sound crazy, but we also see May die at the end of this episode. Sol and Torben begin to hear Koril in their heads as she says, "You shouldn't have brought him here." And Torben says, "No, my mind is a fortress. You will not get in." She says, "No, not him," as Kelnaka enters the fight. He is now being taken over by all of these witches. And this awesome fight of a Jedi Wookiee in live action, in action, did not disappoint. He scratches Torben's face up really bad, and he almost kills him before Sol steps in. Then, before he almost chokes Sol to death, Indara comes to save the day, using the Force to clear his mind. And in doing so, all the other witches die? Do you think all the witches died in this scene? Tell me what you think in the comments below. But Indara tells Sol to go get the twins. And as he runs off, we get a different perspective of what happened on this broken runway between Osha and May. Because from Osha's perspective, she just sees May fall and then Sol saved her. However, that's not what really happened. Sol is able to catch both girls. However, he is not strong enough to hold both of them, and he has to choose. And of course, he chooses Osha. He felt the connection to her earlier. She's supposed to be his Padawan, but he just allows May to die. Or at least, so we think she's dead. This explains a lot while also giving us a ton of new questions. It explains the Easter eggs in episode 4 with Kelnaka and why he had all of the witches' drawings on his walls. And it also explains what truly happened, the choice that Sol had to make. But it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Is Mother Koril really dead? Is she the mastermind behind everything going on with Kymir and May? Or is she somehow embodied with May now, like Mother Anisea was trying to do earlier? A lot more to speculate about for the next week until the finale. But we flash to their ship flying through hyperspace, as Indara says, "I warned you not to interfere," talking to Sol and Torben. Sol says, "I wanted the twins to be safe," and Indara says, "But you never thought of the consequences. The girl's entire family is now dead, and so is her sister." Torben then asks the most important question, what are we going to tell the Jedi Council? To which Indara says, "We will tell them the truth. May started the fire that burned the witch's fortress down, and everyone was lost." Which clearly we just saw is not the truth. Sol says he must go in front of the council to tell them what really happened, and Indara says, "No way. You're not going to do that to this girl. We just pretty much killed her entire family and her sister, and you're going to take away her dream as well to become a Jedi?"
I don't think so.
As Osha wakes up asking what happened, Sol tells her that May started the fire, and the episode ends. The lie continues. This episode was great. I rated it at an 8.5 out of 10. The action scenes were fantastic. The callbacks to High Republic novel stuff, the call forwards to Anisea predicting what happens to the Jedi with Anakin and Palpatine, to learning a lot more about these witches and their abilities, seeing Anisea get into Torben's head like that, and only imagining what was happening in Kelnaka's head when all of these witches were inside of it. But with only one episode left, there is so much left to cover. And how is this show going to end? Tell me what you think in the comment section below. Rank this episode out of 10 in the comments if you have not already. And did you catch this possible direct reference to Darth Plagueis and Darth Tenebris in episode 6 of The Acolyte? Well, I explain all of this in this video right here.